Hello guys, welcome to this new video lesson on language and linguistics. Ferdinand de Saussure is acknowledged as a founder of modern linguistics and semiology and as having laid the groundwork for structuralism and post-structuralism. This Swiss linguist has laid his ideas a foundation for many significant developments in both linguistics and semiology in the 20th century. Now, he is widely considered one of the founders of 20th century linguistics and one of the two major founders, together with Charles Sanders Peirce, semiotics and semiology. In the coming up slides, we shall have a look at Charles Sanders Peirce's partner. Saussure had a major impact on the development of linguistic theory in the first half of the 20th century. We have seen in the previous video lessons his contributions to language and linguistics, and his two currents of thought emerged independently of each other, one in Europe, the other in America. The results of each incorporated the basic notions of Saussure's thought in forming the central tenets and principles of structural linguistics. According to him, linguistic entities are parts of a system and are defined by their relations to one another within said system. The thinker used the game of chess for his analogy. So he talks about the theory of signs and his linguistic definitions and his ideologies and concepts underlying this signifying system by comparing it with an analogy, an example of a game of chess, citing that the game is not defined by the physical attributes of the chess pieces, but the relation of each piece to other pieces. Those who are adept and skilled in playing the game of chess, of course, may identify and understand, comprehend this analogy that Saussure has drawn between linguistics, a theory of signs, and defining language as a signifying system and as a system of signs is easily comprehensible. Those who know the game, the theory, the rule, and the principles behind the game of chess, where the game is not defined by the physical attributes of the chess piece, but then the underlying relationship of each piece to each other pieces. Just like that, Saussure defines language as a system of signs where it's not the physical attributes that is concerned with the users of a language, but then he defines and he redefines and then he proposes the tenets and principles of language as a signifying system based on the relationships between each other constituents, components, and the elements underlying the language system. According to Saussure's theory of sign, we have already seen that he says language is a system of signs, and each word and each sound, everything is a sign. He defines everything in terms of a sign. And a sign consists of two parts, that is a signifier and the signified. And Saussure, in fact, defines signifier as a form the image or a visual or a graphic script which a sign takes. And the signified is, in fact, an interpretation, or it is a symbolic meaning, or it is an implied meaning which it represents, which this concept represents. For example, you can see the word rose. In the previous video lessons, we have seen a couple of examples too. So many examples were there. Here, Saussure says that R-O-S-E is rose, and that is the signifier, and the picture of roses, or the meaning which the word R-O-S-E, or the image which it proposes or which implies or which it creates in your mind, that in fact is the signified, where you can see the picture of roses. So this is exactly which we have seen in the couple of previous video lessons. Now you can see Charles Sanders Peirce here, who was in fact another co-partner of Saussure, who has contributed a lot to the development and the progression of the theory of science, where Charles Sanders Peirce, he defines everything in terms of signification and interpretation. Peirce's sign theory or his semiotics. So you can always attribute semiology to Saussure and semiotics to Charles Sanders Peirce, the American linguist. According to his theory, an account of signification or representation or reference and meaning. So this is how Charles Sanders Peirce defines a sign, or according to his theory of sign, there is in fact, he defines or he labels all these things based on signification, representation, reference, and meaning. Because he talks about everything by concerning or emphasizing or highlighting interpretation. That's what Peirce is concerned of. Because according to Peirce, developing a thoroughgoing theory of science was a central philosophical and intellectual preoccupation. Okay, and Peirce's accounts are distinctive, and he is in fact very innovatively, he talks about the breadth and complexity of this system, and for capturing the importance of representation, interpretation to that of signification. If Saussure was a linguist or a semiotician who talks about language as a system of signs, and language in fact is a system of signifying, that is, you see rose, it signifies a flower, of course. That's what you mean by a signifying system. You see smoke, or you see fire, the flames of fire, or you say fire, you understand that something is burning, the fire is burning there. So all these are signifying things. You see the red light, it shows stop, the traffic signals, the light shows, it signifies you to stop. And the green light signifies you to move on. Or you can resume your journey, you can continue driving. So these are what you mean by signifying things. But Charles Sanders Peirce, when he defined, or when he talked about types, 3 different types of signs as index, icon, and symbol, he is emphasizing, or he is highlighting the theory of interpretation rather than signification. There you can see a wonderful quote by Charles Sanders Peirce. A sign can be called as a sign only if there is some sort of an interpretation. If there is no interpretation, it can't be called a sign. Simple as that. So that is what he says. And as he, both these semioticians and linguists, when they talk about semiology and semiotics, what they mean by is in fact, one signifier has or can afford to have multiple signifiers. For example, RED, 3 letters of the alphabet, RED. When you talk about this, there are so many meanings, there are so many interpretations, and there are so many realms which is attributed and ascribed to this signifier red, or RED. It can mean a fruit, the apple. It may imply love, the red blood hearts, or passion, or warmth, emotion. It may refer to blood, referring to some a red cross. What does it imply? It may signify something related to a casualty, bloodshed, violence, medication, medicine, or a hospital, or some injury, accident, anything. Okay, something related to medicine and treatment and hospitalization. Red, RED, it may also mean fire, an emergency, or an urgency, or such thing. So one signifier is supposed to have, or may have, there is a chance for a signifier to have multiple signifiers. So that is what the slide means. Again, I am repeating the same slide. This is the third time I'm talking about comparing or juxtaposing both Saussure at one end and Charles Sanders Peirce at the other end, and giving you, opening up how they define signs. If Saussure talks about sign as two pieces, the signifier and signified, Charles Sanders Peirce always talks about this in a threefold way, where he delineates or he defines icons, symbols, and indexes, which you have seen in detail in the previous video lesson. Now, what is denotation and what is connotation? What you see literally, what you see physically, that is what you mean by denotation. But connotation is different. The, the symbolic meaning or the inferred meaning, the implied meaning, all these things are what you think, or it creates a lot of emotions. So for example, if a word has got a literal meaning or a dictionary meaning, or you check out with the lexicon, it gives you a denotation. But connotation is different. You can attribute symbolic meanings, of course. A rose, when I show you a rose, the rose denotes it's a beautiful flower, red in color or pink in color. But when I say this is a red rose, which is as red, as beautiful, charming, and warm as my love or my emotion for you, it means connotation. That red rose connotes my love for you. So this is what you mean by denotation and connotation. Mind you, Saussure always talks about things in dichotomy. That is, he talks about language or linguistic science or anything is dyadic in explanation. He talks about the two pieces or the two contrasts. That is why we say that Saussure contributions are always binary in nature, binary in definition. But whereas Sanders Peirce, he talks about anything, he defines everything in a threefold way. Yes. Now, these are in fact two seminal contributions by Ferdinand de Saussure to language and linguistics. In fact, this Lang and Perrault, they are They are a theoretical linguistic dichotomy. That's what I told. Dichotomy means contrast, opposing, different. Just like day and night, man and woman, etc., girl and boy. These are dichotomies, That's why we say it's binary. Likewise, Lang and Perrault is a linguistic, a theoretical dichotomy which Saussure distinguished in his phenomenal landmark work, that is course in general linguistics, which we have already seen. Now, these two are French terms where Lang means it's the system of rules. In simple terms, I can tell you this is a abstract system. It is a system of rules, theories, and conventions of a linguistic system, of a language system, of a signifying system. It is independent of and it pre-exists individual user. For example, if I tell you English was there even before you were born, even before I was born, that means English language and its theories and its grammatical rules, its syntactical rules, etc., etc., were born. It existed even before we were born. So does English have any very direct relationship between us? No. The language was there, the theory was there, the framework was there, even before yourself and myself were born. SVO pattern was there, followed by English language users. So the Lang is independent of its individual user. There is no relationship between the history, origin, and evolution of English language and yourself and myself. It was there. So that signifying system was there always. But Perrault is something different. When you start learning all these theories, grammar, syntax, etc., etc., and then finally you start using language, that is your Perrault. So in simple terms, Lang is your language knowledge, the knowledge of language or the knowledge of your theory and rules. But Perrault is your performance. The way I ask you, do you know the alphabet, the letters of English alphabet? Yes, you know from A to Z. But if you keep mum, if you keep silent, means that's just a knowledge, and that is your lang. But when you start saying A, B, C, that's performance. That is your parole. So there goes the difference between lang and parole. Lang is a system. It is, in fact, a general phenomenon. It's a cultural process, a human ability to have language. It is there, latent in every individual. That knowledge or that rule which makes a person possible for to talk, how to speak, your knowledge of how to use language. That is your lang. But parole is the way you talk. It is varying. It can change. You speak in a way which is quite different from a North Indian use English language. And both yourself and that North Indian is entirely different when a European speaks or talks in English. So parole keeps on changing. Parole is dynamic. Parole is never constant or consistent. It can change from culture to culture. Geographical changes can impact it, influence it. But lang it is an abstract system which doesn't change. Here, I'm sharing multiple slides with you related to Saussure'S structuralism and the difference between lang and parole. So this is a very important, very significant conceptual dichotomy between lang and parole, where lang is a collective abstract system which is shared by a community, thereby it becomes a social and cultural phenomenon. But parole is the actual speech made by an individual. Again, you have a text and so many, for example, if you take up David Crystal or if you take up John Lyon's, if you take up Saussure'S course in general linguistics, if you take up Chomsky's syntactic structures, all those gives you references to the theory and conventions underlying English language, English grammar, English syntax, etc., etc. All these are lang. The knowledge you acquire by reading all these texts is your lang. But when you start speaking, when you read out Chomsky's syntactic structures, if you start reading Saussure'S course in general linguistics, it's your parole. That is what is the exact difference between lang and parole. It talks about lang. It talks about authority. It talks about a theory. It talks about convention. It talks about the knowledge which you know, the abstract knowledge which you know. But there should be some concreteness. There should be some physicality to how you're using this language. And that is what you mean by your parole. So again and again, you have more simpler terms, simpler definitions for lang and parole, where lang is a system, but parole is the system which is put into practice. And this is how language becomes a social and cultural phenomenon, and how Saussure defines language in a social cultural context. So here again you have some principles and guidelines. Where lang is a community knowledge, and it consists of rules. And Saussure is in fact primarily or basically concerned or bothered with lang, not parole, because parole is an individual knowledge. It can change from individual to individual, from space to space, from culture to culture, from practice to practice. It depends upon the individual. It's a personal performance, you know. But lang should be the target of a linguist, because it's a definition, it's a study, it's an exploration, it's an investigation, it's a formulation of a theory which is shared by the collective community. So a linguist or a semiotician must be concerned or bothered about lang, not parole, because a child learns the role, not the structure. You're driving, of course, the teacher, the driving master teaches you the rules, the signs, and whatever happens on road and in the traffic, and how you have the theoretically and practically he talks to you. He makes you learn the principles behind driving. But when you are on steer, when you start, you begin, you turn the key and you start the car, that is your parole, because you are performing, you are putting your knowledge into practice. That is your parole. So again, you have more definitions on lang and parole. Of course, you can learn whichever is easily comprehensible and which you can handle and manage more easier. So here you can see the abstract system or the foundational knowledge, theories and conventions underlying a community. But when the individual starts speaking, that is in fact the parole. Again, you have more definitions here. Have a look at it. Because Saussure wants to study now language in a systematic, scientific way, it is understandable that his linguistics would focus on the lang rather than the parole. That's what I have just explained to you a couple of minutes back. That is, you are formulating theory and you are formulating structure and conventions and rules and principles which underlie a language, of course. So, if you have to define, if you have to scientifically approach, if you have to keep a systematic and scientific way of formulating rules, you have to be more concerned and bothered about the lang, not the parole, because the lang is abstract and it is therefore easily systematized. But parole is messy, it keeps on changing. You speak, I speak, your friends speak. 10 of us start speaking. It's different, it's entirely different. So you cannot formulate a rule based on our speech. You can only formulate depending upon what is collectively acceptable. So that is why Saussure favors, or Saussure talks in favor of lang rather than parole. So here is a group of school to which Saussure and the other semioticians belong. It's the Geneva school. Ferdinand de Saussure, the Swiss linguist, was the leader of that, and you have the followers. And what is the name of this particular school? There is the Geneva school, where Saussure was born in Geneva, and what are the main ideas and how are they technically referred to? The Geneva school and its leader Saussure, and their school of thought was in fact defined as modern structuralism or structuralist linguistics, and their contributions you can see Lang and Perrault and his theory of linguistic sign, and later synchrony, dichrony, syntagmatic and paradigmatic, and various other contributions some of which we have already detailed in the previous lessons, and some of which are delineated and expressed in detail in the upcoming video lessons. So that is it. Yes, this is another dichotomy. Two different and complementary viewpoints in linguistic analysis. I have already talked to you about applied linguistics and theoretical linguistics, and we have seen many multitudes of branches of linguistics when we talked about ethnolinguistics, cultural linguistics, psycholinguistics, phonetics, phonology, morphology, syntax, discourse analysis, etc., etc. I told you I'm leaving out a second kind of distinction where Ferdinand de Saussure talks about two different viewpoints, complementary, at the same time they are a dichotomy, they are a binary kind of approach. That is, he talks about synchronic and dichronic approaches to language. These are in fact two approaches through which language has to be studied scientifically. Language has to be approached and dealt with scientifically and systematically according to Ferdinand de Saussure. A synchronic approach considers a language at a moment in time without taking its history into account. It describes the pieces on the board at any given moment. This is also called as static linguistics. Why? You learn language at a particular point of time. I tell you, trace the linguistic developments from 2015 to 2020. Okay, that is different. When I tell you, you just learn, you just analyze the changes and developments in linguistics or scientifically in the field of language in 2019. I'm specifying a particular period of time. This is called the synchronic approach. This is in fact defined as static linguistics. But when I tell you to describe language, I tell you to trace the linguistic changes and what all changes and revolutions and drastic alterations that has taken place, new words in vocab, in grammar, in the uses of language, in the formality of language, informality of language, and all those things, the usages of different phrases, idioms, words, the enrichment, the new vocab that has entered the Oxford Dictionary, etc., etc., all these things. Will you please trace it from 2015 to that of 2020? You are analyzing and tracing a period of the changes of language through a period of time. And this is in fact Dichronic approach, that is describing how they have reached this position. This is defined also as evolutionary linguistics. So here again, synchronic linguistics aims at describing language at a specific point of time, such as these two are synonymous, connect each with each. Learning language at a specific point of time is defined as synchronic approach, whereas learning, analyzing, and evaluating the changes of a language during a particular period of time is mentioned, then it is the dichronic. So synchronic, Greek, it means together, plus chronos, time. It studies language at a point of time as a system at present. But whereas in Greek, dichronic, dia means through. That means through the time. It considers the language in process of its historical change. Again and again, I have more definitions for you where synchronic linguistics and dichronic linguistics, you can have a look at yourself. These two approaches of linguistics. And synchronic linguistics, it confines study of how a language is spoken by a specified speech community at a particular point of time. You just analyze or evaluate or have a look at, observe language or how English is used by the media people during 2020. So you're talking about a particular group of people and a particular point of time is referred to here, is specified. That is synchronic linguistics or synchronic study of language. But when I tell you, you just trace how English has been manipulated and employed by the media people from the 1990s till the 21st century, means you are learning or you're evaluating, you're analyzing language changes during a long period of time in the course of this period of time, and that is in fact dichronic linguistics. So a dichronic approach considers the development and evolution of a language through history. So historical linguistics is typically a dichronic study. So this is what these two concepts were theorized by Saussure in Geneva from 1896 to that of 1911, and this appeared in writing in his posthumous work, that is Course in General Linguistics, which is published in 1916. So here you have a visual graphic representation of synchronic and dichronic study of language, where the time axis is there. Dichronic means it's an evolutionary or historical linguistics. Dichronic approach or dichronic linguistics is also termed as evolutionary linguistics or historical linguistics, whereas synchronic study of language is in fact static. It is referred to as static linguistics, where you are learning language at a specific point of time. This principle or this theory can be applied to in various other fields and various other realms. You can apply it. I mean, if language is a cultural phenomenon, of course, the synchronic approach and dichronic approach can be applied or ascribed, attributed to learning anything, any walk of life, any realm, media, art, culture, philosophy, fabrics, costumes, eating habits, food, cuisine, music, everywhere you can use or you employ this kind of approaches in learning. So again, synchronic linguistics confines to the study of how a language is spoken by a community, a group of people at a particular point of time. Okay, and dichronic linguistics is a kind where we study the historical development of a language. For example, chair, what do you mean by a chair? And what do you mean by how trace the development of the usage of the word vulgar? Okay, because it changes in the course of a time or in the period of time. It has evolved, new meanings have been applied to it, and there are a lot of changes in the usage of the word vulgar. So synchronic means slices. Of course, here you can see a very clear representation of the time axis. What is dichrony and what is synchrony? Dichrony is evolution. It's you can see the line, the arrow mark, which shows the movement or the journey or the course of time period. But synchrony means it's a learning of language or culture or fabrics or costumes or music or film or history or astronomy or life science or whatever. You learn it as slices. You take point of time and you take a specific period of time. You take an instant. You take slices and chunks of a time period and you learn and you evaluate and investigate. That is in fact synchrony. So again, you have very much clear-cut dichotomical differences and similarities, where the definition of synchronic linguistics and dichronic linguistics, yes, and it is defined or it is differentiated based on definition, on time, the history of language and language evolution, and how these studies and investigations and researches are conducted or organized in both these two approaches, in synchronic as well as dichronic linguistics. In this, it studies, synchronic linguistics studies grammar, classification, and arrangement of the features of a language, whereas dichronic linguistics involves comparative linguistics, etymology. Etymology in the sense, I told you, vulgar. What is the etymology of vulgar? That is in fact a dichronic approach, and how language has evolved. You learn Old English, Middle English, and Modern English. You have learned the family of languages, that you have traced English as that the parent or the mother language is a Germanic. The Teutonic group of Germanic language is the former ancestor of English language, etc., etc. All these are dichronic. It focuses on the history of languages and the history, the evolution of languages, and the different study of language or whatever. That's why I told you synchronic and dichronic approaches can be applied to attributed in any realm of life, any walk of life, any domain or any branch of knowledge. But then synchronic linguistics does not focus on history of language and language of evolution. It talks about the slices today or this year or for the last 6 months, for the last couple of months, what all changes happen. That is a synchronic approach to language. So in fact, we have spoken on Ferdinand de Saussure, his contribution, his theory of science, and Charles Sanders Peirce were these two co-founders of semiology and semiotics. What are the similarities? What are the dissimilarities? And the basic contributions of Ferdinand de Saussure, there is a Lang and Perrault, and synchronic and dichronic approaches to language. These are the two binary theoretical linguistic concepts and ideologies introduced by Ferdinand de Saussure, one of the most important name, inevitable in the domain of language and linguistics. Thank you guys. Thank you for watching. See you in the next video lesson.